debate. The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Happy New Year to you and colleagues. Let's sincerely hope that 2021 is a big improvement over 2020. I'll be sharing my time with the member from Acadie Bathurst. When this government first got elected in 2015 and subsequently in 2019, it rightly identified growing income inequality as a serious threat to a free and democratic society. Several initiatives were taken, including the raising of the upper tax bracket and the lowering of a middle bracket, a worthy initiative. But clearly the most significant initiative was the creation of the Canada Child Benefit, a direct cash benefit to low-income families with young children. Pre-pandemic, this meant more than $100 million had been allocated to Scarborough-Guildwood. This in turn led to the largest reduction of child poverty of any riding in Canada. During the pandemic, the additional CCB funds have been allocated to the benefit of Scarborough-Guildwood and all other ridings. Bill C-14 is proposing a $1,200 benefit for each child under the age of 6 for eligible families. It's estimated to be an increase of 20% over the maximum Canada Child Benefit. For Scarborough-Guildwood, that will likely mean an additional $20 million directly into the hands of low-income families. The CCB has had and continues to have the desired effect of lifting kids and families out of poverty, supplementing family incomes, and reducing wealth inequality. I do wish that there was a definitive study showing the economic return of $100 million distributed locally, now estimated to be $120 million spent locally. I would imagine that there is a significant economic multiplier. Regrettably, however, a benefit is not a job. Life and economics are never that simple, but I dare say that given the choice, most parents would prefer to have a decent, if modest, job that feeds their family rather than a government benefit. Then along comes a pandemic and knocks the most vulnerable for a loop. It's hard to provide for your family when you don't have a job. Quite properly, the government of Canada stepped in with an array of benefits, the most significant of which is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, known colloquially as CERB. I don't know the gross amount of CERB funds into Scarborough-Guildwood, but it's certainly in the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. But again, a benefit is not a job. But what's been revealed over time, however, is really the tale of two pandemic economies. For those earning salaries calculated to be more in the order of $40 per hour or more, they've not only survived, but thrived. In many instances, prospered with both increased income and increased capital assets, such as homes, business, properties, etc. Those, however, in the $15 to $20 range have been devastated, slipping closer and closer to absolute poverty with attendant worries about food and housing insecurity. Regrettably, the biggest pop-up business in Scarborough-Guildwood has been the proliferation of food banks. Unfortunately, they are doing a roaring business. This has been a huge setback for income inequality and for the catchphrase, those in the middle class and those wanting to join it. If this economic disruption continues for much longer, Canada risks a permanent structural inequality that will be devastating for all of us, rich and poor alike. Permanently impoverished citizens are unstable and make the lives of others insecure, hence the rise of security devices and gated communities. The pandemic has exposed our vulnerability in supply chains. The reason that there are no jobs in the $15 to $20 range is because of globalization's desire to get the cheapest product fastest. We don't make PPE, for instance. We can't create our own vaccines. We line up at box stores to purchase products made everywhere else but here. Good for others, but not so good for us. Vulnerabilities that could be papered over in prosperous times, but not so much now. I'm not so Pollyannish as to think that Canadians are going to rush out and start buying more expensive Canadian-made products just because it's Canadians. Canadians are pretty tight with their money. I would, however, argue that they might well buy Canadian products made in their community by their neighbors if they thought or knew that the competing product was made by slaves in a foreign country. I would like to believe that Canadian consumers, if they knew, would find the purchase of slave-made products repugnant. Yet here we are in 2021 with massive amounts of products being sold in Canada where the supply chain is infected with slave labor. According to Walk Free Foundation, their conservative estimate is that 40 million people are engaged in modern slavery. World Vision estimates that 1,200 Canadian companies are importing goods made with slave labor. Recently, CBC's Marketplace ran a piece on slave labor in the making of the PPE products that we use on a daily basis. The Globe and Mail ran 2 articles on how Canadian companies use slave labor to build products in China. The Toronto Star wrote a devastating piece on shipments coming from foreign sources that U.S. will not allow to be sold in their country, but allows for the transshipment into Canada. Polls are starting to show that Canadians are becoming increasingly alarmed. Some frame this argument against supply chain slavery in terms of moral repugnance. I share that view. Some frame it in this argument in terms of universal basic human rights. I also share that view. Few, however, frame it in terms of societal and economic suicide. We, as consumers, knowingly or unknowingly, purchase a product infested by supply chain slavery. We are destroying a job opportunity for a friend or a neighbor or a family member. Remember the tale of the 2 pandemic economies. Those in the $15 to $20 range are most devastated by the absence of jobs. Any goal of redistributing income equality is out the window. The risk of permanent structural damage to the economy is increased. So what to do? I appreciate the government seems to be becoming more alive to the moral and human rights argument and stepping up the authorities that it does have. Time will tell how effective that increased surveillance will be. I, however, would suggest 4 specific initiatives. The first is the intentional use of government procurement process to shorten the supply chain from global to Canadian. As one person put it in our pre-budget consultation, the supply chain should be run up and down the 401. Second, give the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise the power to compel companies to respond to inquiries on human rights abuses. Third, make it abundantly clear that the failure to cleanse supply chain slavery from a company's business will immediately result in the denial of consular and or government financial support. Fourth, adopt and or take over Bill S-216, formerly my private member's bill, C-423. It would compel all companies of a certain size to certify to their shareholders and to the Minister of Public Safety that they've examined their supply chains and are satisfied that there is no slave labor present. Because you see, Madam Speaker, not only is slavery morally repugnant and a gross abuse of human rights, it's also in our economic interest to ensure that the products Canadians buy are free of slave labor. Canadian workers are among the best in the world, but they can't compete with slaves. The government's laudable goal of reducing income inequality will never be achieved if infected supply chains are allowed to exist. The speech from the throne has many laudable and supportable initiatives, but to not deal forcefully and effectively with supply chain slavery is, in fact, self-defeating. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for your time and your attention. I look forward to questions from colleagues.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député de Bellechasse.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Léger-Lévis. Madam Speaker, I was just getting up to change seats.
The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the speech that my colleague good friend just gave. I just have one issue that was red flagged for me. He mentioned the importance of changing our supply routes to up and down the 401. I would like to give him the opportunity to also include supply chains right from the east to the west, north to the south across this great nation.
Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Well, thank you to my friend for pointing that out. I knew as soon as I wrote that into the speech, someone would jump up on it, and it was actually a quote from the Scarborough Caucus consultation, pre-budget consultation. The point being that the member is absolutely right. It is, of course, a supply chain within the nation's borders, not just up and down the 401. But the point that the commentator was making was that we need to get our vulnerability. We need to recognize that we created vulnerabilities for ourselves. There's a lot of conversation in this chamber about vaccines. Well, one of the reasons that we have so much vaccine conversation is that we've created a dependency in our own country on other countries supplying such a vital product. Well, that if the pandemic teaches us anything, it is that we need to look at those supply chains, particularly in vital products.
Commentaire. L'honorable député de Longueuil-Saint.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start by wishing everyone a Happy New Year. And I'd like to talk about two incidents that occurred last week that don't appear on the surface to be related, but they are. Billions of dollars are being spent during a pandemic, but there was an Indigenous homeless person who died, frozen. The government, then we also have the Governor General who terrorized her employees. And she's going to be receiving $150,000 in a lifelong pension. The government didn't sign an agreement, housing agreement, or hasn't for the past 3 years. And that kind of an agreement could have helped to build social housing units for Indigenous homeless people in Montreal and could have helped save the life of the person who died last week. On the other hand, we're going to be giving $150,000 for life to a woman who was useless. That's very expensive. Does my colleague not think that it's high time for Canada to abolish the monarchy?
The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
The short answer is no.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Courtenay-Albany.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his speech. Madam Speaker, small businesses in the tourism and hospitality sectors, as we know, have been hit extremely hard by the pandemic. The impact of COVID-19 on these sectors has been devastating, and many are now facing closure, and the Canadian economy could see hundreds of thousands of jobs lost by the end of February. In November, the Liberals announced help through their HASCAP program, but here we are at the end of January. No help has been delivered. The Liberals don't seem to understand how urgently this help is needed. Small businesses can't wait another few weeks or months. They need help now. Will the Liberals tell this House when the hardest hit businesses will get the help that was promised? And how many small businesses are the Liberals willing to let close permanently before they make this help available? It's urgent.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank my friend for the question, and I don't think that there is a person, whether they're on the government side or the other side, that doesn't recognize the devastation that this pandemic has wrought on small businesses in particular, and the inability of a lot of them to even survive. So the government is, in my judgment, alive to the issue. The question is how to get the funds to the individuals and businesses, and I would say that the rent subsidy is one of the ways in which it's being done, and the wage subsidy is another way in which it's being done. I think the passage of C-14, therefore, is quite vital to update the speed with which relief comes to small businesses.
Reprise de débat.